The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years. The Galactic Confederation, a union of 72 intelligent species, had maintained order through diplomacy, trade, and the careful avoidance of conflict. But peace, as the elder races knew, was never permanent. It was simply a pause between storms. When humanity made first contact with the Confederation, they were considered nothing special. A young species from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. The Confederation welcomed them, as they welcomed all newcomers, with cautious optimism and bureaucratic patience. Humans were assigned the lowest classification, species level 1, meaning they were primitive, harmless, and ultimately forgettable. That classification would soon change everything. The crisis began in the outer reaches, where the ancient prison world of Cathara 9 orbited a dying red star. For millennia, this planet had served as the ultimate punishment for the galaxy's worst criminals. It was not a prison in the traditional sense. There were no cells, no guards, no walls. The planet itself was the prison. Cathara 9 was what the Confederation called a Deathworld, a classification reserved for planets so hostile to life that survival was measured in hours, not years. The surface of Cathara 9 was a nightmare of volcanic activity, toxic atmosphere, extreme radiation, and predatory life forms that had evolved to hunt anything that moved. The gravity was twice the galactic standard. The temperatures swung from boiling hot during the day to freezing cold at night. The very air was poison to most species, filled with sulfur compounds and microscopic parasites that could burrow into flesh within minutes. No one sentenced to Cathara 9 had ever returned. That was the point. But now something had changed. Deep beneath the surface, in caverns that had never been explored, scientists detected an energy signature unlike anything they had seen before. Analysis suggested it was a power source of immense capability, something that could revolutionize space travel, medicine, and warfare. Some called it the heart of Cathara. Others called it the key to galactic dominance. The problem was obvious. The power source was on a death world, and no known species could survive long enough to reach it. High Chancellor Orcs, a towering insectoid being who had led the Confederation for 2 centuries, convened an emergency session of the Council of Species. Representatives from all 72 member worlds gathered in the massive crystalline dome of the Central Assembly. The mood was tense. Everyone knew what was at stake. If the Confederation did not claim the heart of Cathara, someone else would. The Syndicate, a criminal organization that operated in the shadows of civilized space, had already sent scouts to the planet. They had lost 17 ships and over 300 operatives. But they would not stop trying. The heart was too valuable. The question before the council was simple. How could they reach something that no one could survive long enough to find? It was the Veth ambassador, a pale serpentine creature with silver scales, who proposed the solution. The Veth were known for their cold logic and their willingness to sacrifice others for the greater good. Their proposal was as heartless as it was practical. Send volunteers from every species, thousands of them. Drop them on the surface with basic equipment, and let natural selection determine the survivors. If even one individual could reach the caverns and secure the heart, the mission would be a success. The losses would be acceptable. The council erupted in protest. Several species withdrew their ambassadors in disgust. The proposal was barbaric, a return to the savage practices of pre-civilized times. But as the debate continued and no better alternatives emerged, a grim acceptance settled over the chamber. They had no choice. The call went out across the galaxy. Volunteers were needed for a mission of extreme danger. The reward was substantial: full citizenship for oneself and one's descendants, a fortune in galactic credits, and a place of honor in Confederation history. The requirement was simple: be willing to die. To everyone's surprise, the response was overwhelming. Criminals seeking redemption, soldiers seeking glory, scientists seeking discovery. Desperate individuals from 100 different worlds, each with their own reasons for answering the call. Among them were the humans. Earth's government selected 100 volunteers from a pool of 10,000 applicants. They were tested for physical fitness, mental stability, and survival instincts. The selection process was brutal. Many applicants were rejected for being too weak, too slow, or too afraid. But those who passed were among the finest specimens humanity had to offer. One of them was a woman named Sarah Chen. Sarah was 32 years old, a former military officer who had served in the Pacific conflict and later worked as a wilderness survival instructor. She was not the strongest candidate, nor the fastest, nor the most intelligent, but she possessed something that the selection committee valued above all else: an absolute refusal to die. Her psychological evaluation noted that she had survived 3 near-death experiences before the age of 25, a helicopter crash in the mountains, a training accident that left her stranded in the ocean for 6 days, a viral outbreak that killed 90% of her unit. Each time she had emerged alive when others had perished. The evaluators could not explain it. They simply noted that Sarah Chen appeared to have a talent for survival. She was assigned to the mission without hesitation. The transport ships gathered at the edge of Confederation space, a fleet of massive vessels carrying over 5,000 volunteers from 37 different species. The human contingent was small, only 100 individuals out of the thousands. They were largely ignored by the other species, who considered them too primitive to be of any use. The Kelthari, a species of massive ape-like beings with 4 arms and skin like stone, laughed openly at the humans during the orientation sessions. The Veth measured them with cold eyes and calculated their survival odds at less than 1%. The insectoid Torvin clicked their mandibles in what might have been amusement and declared that the humans would be the first to fall. Sarah ignored them all. She had heard worse insults during her time in the military. What mattered was not what others thought of her. What mattered was what she could do. The journey to Cathara 9 took 3 weeks in hyperspace. During that time, the volunteers were briefed on what they would face. The presentations were clinical, almost emotionless, as if the Confederation officials were describing a minor inconvenience rather than a death sentence. The atmosphere of Cathara 9 was toxic to most species. Respirators would be provided, but they would only function for approximately 72 hours before the filters degraded. After that, breathing would become increasingly difficult until respiratory failure occurred. The gravity was 2.1 times galactic standard. For the Kelthari and other heavy worlders, this would be manageable. For lighter species like the Veth and the humans, it would be a constant drain on their strength and endurance. The wildlife was perhaps the greatest threat. Cathara 9 had evolved in isolation for billions of years, and its predators were unlike anything in the known galaxy. The dominant species was the crawler, a massive arthropod with acidic blood and a hunting instinct that bordered on supernatural. Crawlers could sense prey from miles away. They never slept. They never stopped hunting. And then there was the environment itself. Volcanic eruptions were common and unpredictable. The ground could collapse without warning into underground lava flows. The rivers were not water but molten sulfur. The rain was acid. The wind carried particles of volcanic glass that could shred unprotected skin in seconds. The survival rate, based on the Confederation's models, was estimated at 0.3%. Out of 5,000 volunteers, perhaps 15 would survive long enough to reach the caverns. Of those, perhaps 2 or 3 would actually find the heart of Cathara. Sarah listened to all of this with the calm attention of a professional. She asked questions when appropriate. She took notes. She studied the maps and memorized the terrain. While other volunteers grew pale with fear or boasted of their invincibility, she simply prepared. A young human named Marcus, barely 23 years old, approached her one evening in the mess hall. He was nervous, his hands shaking as he held his food tray. "I heard what they said about the survival rate," he said quietly. "Do you think any of us will make it?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She could see the fear in his eyes, the desperate hope that someone would tell him everything would be okay. She could have lied. She could have offered false comfort. But that was not her way. "Some of us will die in the first hour," she said honestly. "Some will last a day. A few might survive a week. But the question is not whether we will die. The question is what we accomplish before we do." Marcus stared at her, confusion replacing some of his fear. "What do you mean?" "Every step we take is a step closer to the goal. Every hour we survive is knowledge gained. Even if we fall, our effort adds to the whole. The mission doesn't need all of us to survive. It needs enough of us to survive long enough." She paused, then added something that would stay with Marcus for the rest of his short life. "The galaxy thinks we are weak because we come from a gentle world. They don't know that Earth is as much a death world as Cathara 9. We evolved in a place that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We just learned to kill it back." The transport ships entered orbit around Cathara 9 on the morning of the 37th day. Through the viewing ports, the volunteers could see the planet below, a roiling mass of red and orange and black. Lightning storms crackled across the surface. Volcanic plumes rose into the upper atmosphere. It looked like hell itself. The drop pods were loaded with ruthless efficiency. Each pod carried 10 volunteers and enough supplies for 1 week. They would be scattered across the surface in a pattern designed to maximize coverage and minimize interference between groups. Sarah was assigned to Pod 7, along with 9 other humans. As she strapped herself into the acceleration couch, she looked around at her companions. They were young, mostly, their faces showing various degrees of fear, determination, and resignation. Some were praying to gods she did not recognize. Others sat in stoic silence. The pod shuddered as it separated from the transport. Through the small viewing port, Sarah watched the stars disappear as they plunged into the toxic clouds of Cathara 9. The heat rose immediately, turning the pod into an oven. Warning lights flashed. Someone screamed, and then they hit the ground. The impact was violent, throwing everyone against their restraints. Metal groaned. Sparks flew. One of the panels burst open, filling the pod with acrid smoke. Through the chaos, Sarah heard screaming, coughing, and the hiss of atmosphere escaping through a hull breach. She released her restraints and moved without thinking. She grabbed the emergency sealant kit and found the breach, a crack along the lower hull no wider than her finger. She applied the sealant, held her breath until it hardened, and then turned to assess the situation. 3 of her companions were dead, killed by the impact. 2 more were badly injured, their bones broken by the violent landing. The remaining 4 were shaken but functional. They looked at her with wide eyes, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Sarah picked up her pack and checked her respirator. The filter was intact. She had 72 hours of breathable air, perhaps more if she conserved her energy. "We move in 5 minutes," she said calmly. "Take what you can carry. Leave the dead. We need to find shelter before the predators find us." No one argued. They emerged from the pod into a landscape from a nightmare. The sky was a sickly orange, heavy with ash and toxic fumes. The ground was black rock, jagged and hot to the touch. In the distance, a volcano spewed lava into the air. The heat was overwhelming, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Sarah looked around, getting her bearings. According to the maps she had memorized, the caverns were approximately 100 kilometers to the north. In normal conditions, that would be a 2-day hike. Here it might take a week, or it might be impossible. But she was not thinking about impossibility. She was thinking about the next step, the next breath, the next decision. Behind her, the other survivors gathered their courage and followed. The first night on Cathara 9 killed more volunteers than any single predator ever would. As the sun set behind the volcanic mountains, the temperature dropped with terrifying speed. What had been burning hot became freezing cold within hours. The thermal shock was devastating. The Veth, whose cold-blooded physiology could not regulate internal temperature, died in their sleep. Their bodies were found the next morning, frozen solid. Their silver scales turned dull gray. 17 of them had survived the initial landing. None saw the sunrise. The Torvan fared little better. Their exoskeletons, so effective at protecting them from physical damage, conducted heat away from their bodies with brutal efficiency. They huddled together for warmth, but it was not enough. By dawn, only a handful remained alive, and those that did were sluggish and disoriented. Sarah had anticipated the temperature drop. She had studied the planetary data during the journey and noticed the extreme thermal differential between day and night. While others had dismissed this information as just another danger on a long list, she had planned for it. Her group dug a shelter into the side of a rocky outcropping, using the heat retained in the stone to maintain a survivable temperature. They rotated watch duties, keeping one person awake at all times to monitor for predators and to ensure no one succumbed to hypothermia. It was a miserable night, but they survived. When morning came, Sarah counted her remaining companions. 2 had died during the night despite their precautions. One had suffered internal injuries from the crash that only became fatal as his body weakened. The other had simply given up. Removing her respirator in the darkness and inhaling the toxic atmosphere until her lungs burned away. Sarah understood despair. She had felt it many times in her life, but she had never allowed it to control her actions. That, perhaps, was the difference between those who survived and those who did not. They moved north as the sun rose, climbing over fields of jagged obsidian that cut through their boots and scraped their skin. The gravity pulled at them constantly, making every step an effort. Sarah felt as though she were carrying another person on her back, an invisible weight that never let up. By midday, they encountered the first crawler. It emerged from a crevice without warning, its body unfolding like a nightmare made flesh. It was enormous, easily 3 meters long, with a segmented body covered in chitinous plates. Its legs, at least a dozen of them, clicked against the rock with a sound like knives being sharpened. Its eyes, clustered in groups of 6, reflected the orange sky with an alien hunger. One of the humans, a young man named Torres, panicked and ran. The crawler's response was instantaneous. It moved with a speed that defied its massive bulk, closing the distance in seconds. Torres screamed once, a high-pitched sound that cut off abruptly as the creature's mandibles found his throat. Sarah did not run. She remained perfectly still, her breathing slow and controlled, her eyes fixed on the predator. The crawler finished with Torres and turned toward the remaining group. It approached slowly, testing the air with its antennae, trying to determine if they were prey or threat. Sarah's mind raced through everything she knew about predators. Cathara 9's wildlife had evolved in a world of constant violence. They were optimized for hunting, for killing, for survival. But that very optimization might be a weakness. Creatures that had never faced intelligent opposition might not recognize intelligent behavior. She raised her hand slowly and pointed at the crawler's cluster of eyes. Then, with a deliberate motion, she made a cutting gesture across her own throat. The crawler hesitated. It was not fear, exactly. The creature could not feel fear in the way humans understood it. But some instinct buried deep in its ancient brain recognized the gesture as a warning. This prey was different. This prey was not afraid. The hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough. Sarah drew her survival knife and held it before her, the blade catching the light. Behind her, the remaining humans did the same. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the crawler retreated. It withdrew into the crevice from which it had emerged, its clicking legs fading into the darkness. Sarah waited until she was certain it was gone before allowing herself to breathe normally again. "How did you know that would work?" asked a woman named Yuki, her voice trembling. "I didn't," Sarah admitted, "but I knew that running wouldn't, and doing nothing meant dying for certain. Sometimes the only option is to try something that might work." They continued north, leaving Torres's body behind. There was no time for burial, no time for mourning. The planet did not allow for such luxuries. Over the next 3 days, Sarah's group merged with other survivors they encountered along the way. A pair of Kelthari, their stone-like skin cracked and bleeding from acid rain exposure. A single Torvan, who had lost her entire group to a lava flow. 3 humans from Pod 12 who had somehow survived when their pod crashed into a sulfur lake. Sarah became their leader without anyone formally declaring it. She did not seek the position, but she did not refuse it either. Leadership on Cathara 9 was not about authority or charisma. It was about competence. And Sarah was the most competent survivor they had. She developed tactics that the other species had never considered. When acid rain approached, she led the group into caves rather than trying to outrun the storm. When food supplies ran low, she identified native organisms that were marginally less toxic than others and developed methods to neutralize their poisons. When crawlers tracked them, she set traps using the volcanic terrain, collapsing tunnels on the creatures or leading them into geothermal vents. The Kelthari watched her with increasing respect. They had believed humans to be fragile, soft-skinned weaklings who would be among the first to fall. Instead, they saw a species that adapted to every challenge with remarkable flexibility. Where the Kelthari relied on their physical strength and the Torvan on their armored bodies, the humans relied on their minds, and on Cathara 9, the mind was proving to be the most effective weapon of all. On the 4th day, they reached the burning plains. This was the most dangerous stretch of terrain between their landing site and the caverns. The burning plains were named for the underground rivers of magma that flowed just beneath the surface. The ground was hot enough to melt standard footwear. Geysers of superheated gas erupted without warning. The air was thick with sulfuric acid. Sarah studied the terrain for hours before attempting to cross. She noticed patterns in the geyser eruptions, timing them with a makeshift chronometer she had built from salvaged pod components. She identified paths where the ground was cooler, where the magma rivers ran deeper. She calculated risks and probabilities with a precision that surprised even herself. "We move in pairs," she announced to the group. "One person watches the ground ahead, the other watches for eruptions. We rest only where the rock is dark, not red. If someone falls, we do not stop." It took 18 hours to cross the burning plains. They lost the Torvan when a geyser erupted directly beneath her, vaporizing her instantly. They lost one of the Kelthari when the ground collapsed under his weight, dropping him into a river of liquid rock. They lost 2 more humans to exhaustion and heat stroke. By the time they reached the other side, only 7 remained. Sarah, Yuki, 1 Kelthari named Torak, and 4 other humans whose names Sarah could barely remember through her exhaustion. She allowed them to rest for 6 hours in the shadow of a massive boulder. It was the longest rest they had taken since landing. Some slept. Others stared at the sky with hollow eyes, their minds struggling to process everything they had experienced. Sarah did not sleep. She sat at the edge of the camp, her knife in her hand, watching the darkness for movement. Her body screamed for rest. Every muscle ached. Her lungs burned from the constant effort of breathing filtered air. But she did not allow herself to close her eyes. On the horizon, she could see the entrance to the caverns. It was perhaps 10 kilometers away, a dark opening in the side of a volcanic mountain. After everything they had endured, the goal was finally in sight. But she knew better than to feel hope. Hope was a luxury she could not afford. The next morning, they discovered what had happened to the other volunteers. The field before the cavern entrance was littered with bodies, hundreds of them. Keltari, Veth, Torvan, and dozens of other species. Some had been killed by crawlers, their bodies torn apart. Others had died from environmental exposure. Still others had killed each other, fighting over supplies or simply driven mad by the constant stress. Sarah walked through the field of death, counting the bodies and cataloging the species. The data confirmed what she had suspected. The Confederation's survival estimate of 0.3% had been optimistic. Based on what she could see, the actual survival rate was closer to 0.1%. Of the 5,000 volunteers who had landed on Cathara 9, perhaps 5 or 6 had reached this point. And based on the bodies near the cavern entrance, most of those had died trying to enter. "The entrance is guarded," Torak observed, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Something lives inside." Sarah nodded. She could see the evidence clearly. Claw marks on the rocks, bloodstains that were still fresh. The cavern was home to something, and that something did not welcome visitors. "We need a plan," said Yuki, her voice tight with fear. Sarah was already forming one. She studied the cavern entrance for hours, noting every detail. The opening was roughly circular, perhaps 20 meters in diameter. The walls were smooth, polished by centuries of something moving in and out. Deep within, she could see a faint glow, possibly the energy signature that the Confederation had detected from orbit. Whatever lived inside was nocturnal. The fresh kills near the entrance had all occurred during the day, when the creature or creatures would have been hunting. That meant the safest time to enter was during the night, when the hunters would be outside. But night on Cathara 9 was deadly for other reasons. The cold would slow them down, make them vulnerable, and they would be moving through total darkness, unable to see threats until they were upon them. Sarah considered her options. Every path forward led to probable death, but some paths had slightly better odds than others. She made her decision. "Tonight, we enter the cavern," she announced. "We move fast and quiet. We find the heart, we secure it, and we get out before dawn. If we encounter hostiles, we do not fight. We run. Our mission is not to kill. Our mission is to survive." The others nodded. By now, they trusted her completely. She had brought them further than anyone had thought possible. If anyone could lead them through this final challenge, it was Sarah Chen. As the sun set and the temperature began to drop, they made their final preparations. They checked their equipment, tightened their clothing, and said whatever prayers they believed in. Sarah looked at each of them in turn. She knew most of them would not survive the night. But she also knew that giving up was not an option. For Earth, she said quietly, for humanity. They entered the darkness together. The cavern swallowed them like a living thing, its mouth closing behind them as they descended into the unknown. The temperature inside was surprisingly stable, warmer than the surface, but not unbearable. The air was cleaner, filtered by miles of rock. Sarah's respirator readings improved slightly, giving her perhaps an extra day of clean breathing. They moved in single file, using touch to guide them when sight failed. The glow they had seen from outside grew brighter as they descended, casting strange shadows on the walls. The rock formations were alien and beautiful, twisted into shapes that no earthly geology could have produced. And then they heard it. A sound like breathing, vast and slow. Coming from somewhere ahead. The rhythm was unmistakable. Something massive was sleeping in the depths of the cavern. Something that they would have to pass to reach the heart. Sarah signaled for silence and continued forward. Each step was an act of courage. Each breath was a gamble. They were walking into the lair of a monster, and they had nothing but determination to protect them. The glow intensified until they could finally see their destination. The heart of Cathara was a crystal formation unlike anything in the known galaxy. It pulsed with inner light, cycling through colors that had no names in any language. The energy it radiated was palpable, a pressure against the skin and mind that bordered on painful. And surrounding it, coiled in a circle of massive proportions, was the Guardian. It was a creature that defied description, part serpent, part arthropod, part something that evolution had never imagined. Its body stretched for hundreds of meters, filling the vast chamber with loops and coils. Its scales were dark as midnight, absorbing the light from the heart rather than reflecting it. Its eyes, when they opened, were like windows into an abyss. It saw them. And Sarah Chen, for the first time in her life, understood what it meant to face something truly beyond human comprehension. The Deathworld had claimed its first victims, but it had not claimed Sarah Chen. Not yet. The Guardian rose like a mountain coming to life. Its body uncoiled with a sound like thunder, scales scraping against stone, sending vibrations through the chamber that Sarah could feel in her bones. The creature's head, if it could be called that, was a mass of sensory organs and cutting appendages, each one designed for a single purpose: the annihilation of intruders. Torak, the last surviving Kelthari, roared a challenge and charged forward. His stone-like skin had protected him through volcanic fire and acid rain. His forearms had crushed crawlers and torn through obstacles that would have stopped lesser beings. He believed in that final moment that his strength would be enough. The Guardian moved with impossible speed. One moment Torak was running, his war cry echoing through the cavern. The next moment, he simply was not there. The creature had struck and withdrawn before any of them could process what had happened. All that remained of the mighty Kelthari was a dark stain on the crystalline floor. Sarah did not run. She did not scream. She did not charge. Instead, she did something that no other species on that mission would have thought to do. She dropped to her knees and lowered her head. The Guardian paused. Its sensory organs focused on this strange creature that was not fleeing, not fighting, not doing any of the things that prey was supposed to do. It circled closer, its massive body creating currents of air that pushed against Sarah's kneeling form. The other survivors watched in frozen horror. Yuki's mouth opened to cry out a warning, but no sound emerged. The remaining humans clutched their weapons uselessly, knowing that nothing they carried could harm this beast. Sarah kept her head down. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something. But she had learned long ago that instincts could be wrong. Sometimes survival required going against every natural impulse. She had noticed something during those brief seconds before Torak's death. The Guardian had not attacked immediately. It had waited, watching them, assessing them. Only when Torak had demonstrated hostile intent had it struck. This suggested something important. The creature was not mindlessly aggressive. It was intelligent enough to discriminate between threats and non-threats. Sarah was betting her life on that intelligence. The Guardian's head descended until it was mere meters away from her kneeling form. She could feel its breath, hot and alien, washing over her. She could hear the subtle clicking of its mandibles, the low rumble of something that might have been curiosity or hunger. Slowly, carefully, Sarah raised her head. She met the creature's gaze, or at least directed her eyes toward where she believed its primary sensory organs were located. She did not challenge it. She did not threaten it. She simply acknowledged its presence, one intelligent being to another. And then she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, barely above a whisper. She spoke in English, knowing the creature could not understand the words. But language was more than words. It was tone, rhythm, intent. It was communication in its purest form. "I am not your enemy," she said. "I am not here to harm you or take what is yours. I only want to survive. That is all I have ever wanted." The Guardian did not respond. It could not respond. But something changed in its posture. The tension in its coiled body eased slightly. The clicking of its mandibles slowed. Sarah continued speaking, her voice never rising, her body never tensing. She talked about Earth, about the oceans and forests and deserts of her home world. She talked about humanity's struggle to survive, to grow, to reach beyond their cradle. She talked about the mission, the volunteers, the thousands who had died to reach this place. She spoke not as a conqueror or a thief, but as a pilgrim, someone who had traveled far and suffered much to reach a sacred place. The Guardian listened. Minutes passed. The tension in the chamber slowly transformed into something else, something that defied easy description. The other survivors remained frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. They watched Sarah and the Guardian engaged in a silent negotiation that transcended species and language. Finally, the creature moved. It withdrew, pulling its massive body back from Sarah's kneeling form. Its coils rearranged themselves, creating a path between where she knelt and where the heart of Cathara pulsed with its otherworldly light. The meaning was unmistakable. It was granting her passage. Sarah rose slowly, every movement deliberate and non-threatening. She walked forward, her boots echoing on the crystalline floor. She passed between loops of the Guardian's body, close enough to touch its midnight scales. She could feel its attention following her, watching, judging, waiting to see what she would do. She reached the heart. Up close, it was even more magnificent than it had appeared from a distance. The crystal was warm to the touch, almost alive. The energy it radiated seemed to respond to her presence, its pulsing rhythm synchronizing with her heartbeat. She could feel it reaching out to her, testing her, evaluating her worthiness. Sarah placed her hand on the surface. Information flooded into her mind. Not words, not images, but pure knowledge transferred directly into her consciousness. She saw the history of the heart, its creation billions of years ago in the heart of a dying star. She saw the Guardian, a creature engineered by an ancient civilization to protect this treasure. She saw the purpose of the heart, a seed designed to catalyze the evolution of species capable of using it wisely. She understood in that moment why so many had failed. The heart was not meant to be taken by force or stolen by cunning. It was meant to be earned. Those who approached it as conquerors were destroyed. Those who approached it as thieves were consumed. Only those who approached it as students, as seekers of knowledge rather than power, could claim its gifts. The ancient civilization that created the heart had designed the ultimate test. Cathara 9 was not just a prison world. It was a proving ground. The toxic atmosphere, the volcanic terrain, the predatory wildlife, and the Guardian itself were all filters, eliminating those who could not adapt and survive. And the final test, the test that mattered most, was the moment of contact. In that moment, the heart judged the worth of the one who touched it. Sarah felt the judgment passing through her. Every decision she had made, every life she had saved, every compromise she had refused, all of it was weighed against an ancient standard she could not comprehend. She felt exposed, vulnerable, more naked than she had ever been in her life. And then the judgment was complete. The heart released itself from the crystal formation that had held it for millions of years. It floated into Sarah's hands, a sphere of pure energy no larger than a human skull. It was warm against her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heart. The Guardian lowered its head in something that might have been a bow. Sarah turned and walked back to her companions. They stared at her with eyes wide with disbelief. They had expected death, and instead, they had witnessed something unprecedented. "We need to leave," Sarah said simply. "The Guardian has granted us passage, but I do not think its patience is infinite." They left the cavern together, moving quickly, but not running. The Guardian watched them go, its massive form fading into the darkness behind them. Sarah carried the heart carefully, shielding it from the harsh environment as they emerged into the open air. The sun was rising over Cathara 9, turning the sky from black to orange. In the distance, Sarah could see the wreckage of the transport ships, still orbiting far above, waiting for survivors to signal extraction. She activated her emergency beacon. The extraction team arrived 3 hours later, a heavily armored shuttle that descended through the toxic atmosphere and landed near their position. The crew that emerged wore full environmental suits, their faces hidden behind polarized visors. They stopped short when they saw Sarah and her companions standing calmly in the open, the heart of Cathara glowing softly in her hands. "You survived," one of them said, disbelief evident even through the suit's speakers. Sarah nodded. "We survived." The journey back to Confederation space took 2 weeks. During that time, Sarah was examined by every scientist, diplomat, and military officer the Confederation could muster. They tested her, questioned her, and studied the heart with instruments that could detect energies across every spectrum known to galactic science. What they found transformed their understanding of humanity. The heart's data records showed everything that had happened on Cathara 9. Every death, every survival, every decision made by every volunteer. The pattern was unmistakable. Humans had survived at a rate nearly 10 times higher than any other species. They had adapted faster, endured longer, and remained psychologically stable in conditions that had driven other beings to madness. High Chancellor Orcs convened a special session of the Council of Species. Sarah was brought before them, still wearing the worn and damaged clothing from her time on the Deathworld. She had refused to change, refused to clean herself up. She wanted them to see exactly what she had been through. "The evidence is conclusive," the Chancellor announced to the assembled representatives. "Human beings are not a level 1 species. Their world of origin, despite its apparent hospitality, is in fact a death world. They have evolved under conditions of extreme adversity and have developed physical and psychological adaptations that far exceed our initial assessments." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Species who had dismissed humans as primitive were now staring at Sarah with new eyes. Furthermore, the Chancellor continued, "The heart of Cathara has chosen a human as its bearer. According to our analysis of the ancient records, this means that humanity has been judged worthy of its gifts. The implications of this are profound." Sarah stepped forward without being invited. The guards moved to stop her, but the Chancellor raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. "The heart has shown me many things," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "It showed me the history of this galaxy, the rise and fall of civilizations far greater than any that exist today. It showed me the purpose for which it was created, to ensure that life continues, that intelligence grows, that the darkness between the stars is held at bay." She held up the heart, its glow intensifying as if responding to her words. "It also showed me why so many have failed to claim it. The heart does not reward strength or cunning or technology. It rewards wisdom. It rewards the ability to endure suffering without becoming cruel. It rewards those who can face death without losing their humanity." The chamber was silent. Every eye was fixed on the small human woman who had accomplished what thousands of the galaxy's greatest warriors could not. "Humanity has a saying," Sarah continued. "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Our ancestors survived ice ages and plagues, predators and famines, wars and disasters that would have extinguished lesser species. We are not strong despite our suffering. We are strong because of it." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "The Confederation classified us as primitive because we had not yet achieved interstellar travel. You measured us by our technology and found us wanting. But technology is not the measure of a species. Character is, will is, the ability to look into the darkness and refuse to surrender." She turned slowly, meeting the gaze of representatives from dozens of different worlds. I am not a warrior. I am not a scientist. I am simply a human being who refused to die. And if I could do what I did, imagine what my species could accomplish if you gave us the chance. High Chancellor Orcs was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he rose from his seat and descended from the raised platform where the council leadership sat. He walked across the floor until he stood directly before Sarah, his towering insectoid form dwarfing her. In my 200 years of leadership, he said, I have never witnessed anything like what you have done. The Confederation owes you a debt that can never be repaid. He turned to face the assembled council. I propose immediate reclassification of humanity from Level 1 to Level 7. I further propose that the human species be granted full partnership status in the Confederation with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. And I propose that Sarah Chen be appointed as the first human ambassador to the Council of Species. The vote was unanimous. In the months that followed, everything changed. Humanity's status in the galaxy was transformed overnight. Where they had once been ignored and dismissed, they were now sought after as advisors, partners, and allies. Human survival techniques were studied and incorporated into Confederation training programs. Human psychological resilience became the subject of extensive research, and the heart of Cathara remained in Sarah's possession. She learned over time to access its full capabilities. The power source could indeed revolutionize space travel, medicine, and countless other fields. But its true gift was knowledge. It contained the accumulated wisdom of an ancient civilization, lessons learned over millions of years of existence. And Sarah became the conduit through which that wisdom was shared. She never returned to Earth. There was too much work to be done. Too many species to connect with, too many problems to solve. But she never forgot where she came from. In every decision she made, in every negotiation she led, she carried the spirit of humanity with her. Years later, when younger humans asked her how she had survived Cathara 9, she always gave the same answer. I didn't do anything special. I just did what humans have always done. I adapted, I endured, I refused to give up. Our species has been facing extinction since before we could walk upright. We survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we were the most stubborn. We looked at death and said, not today. We looked at impossible odds and found a way. That is what makes us human, and that is what will carry us to the stars. The galaxy had once underestimated humanity. After Sarah Chen, they never made that mistake again. Thousands had been sent to the Deathworld. Only one human returned. And in doing so, she changed not only herself, not only her species, but the entire future of intelligent life in the galaxy. The heart of Cathara had chosen well.